I don't believe men were created to be pawns in someone else's game. I believe we were created to be steward kings. Men under authority, yes, but entrusted with real responsibility. Not perfect men, but disciplined ones. Men who rule themselves, serve God directly, and refuse to live in fear. This is king, not pawn. Most men feel it, even if they don't say it out loud. Life feels heavier than it should. More pressure, more rules, more expectations, more hoops to jump through. Your work demands more, your systems demand more, society demands more of you, and yet somehow the men making those demands don't even seem to carry the same weight. Jesus, he actually called this out directly in Matthew 23. Jesus says, "They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger." See, that wasn't vague, but it was precise. He was speaking to the leaders who created systems that burdened others, all while remaining untouched themselves. So look, when you're at work, sometimes you feel it. You wake up early, you show up on time, you put in the effort, you follow the rules, and still more is expected of you. More hours, more output, more compliance. Meanwhile, your leadership, your management operates by a different standard, different rules. They could show up late and have no consequences. And you feel it, not just physically, but mentally. Something isn't right. We have these modern leaders, but it is the same patterns of old. Okay, this pattern didn't end with the Pharisees, it just changed form. Today, it kind of shows up in corporate systems that demand everything from employees while protecting leadership from any form of consequence. Political systems that create rules that they themselves don't even follow, and on both sides of the aisle, mind you, do not get me mistaken. This is on both sides of the aisle. Public figures who preach values that they don't live. The structure, it looks different, okay, but the behavior is the same. Here's a core issue. These people, they create weight, but they don't carry it. They enforce standards on others, but they don't live them themselves. They demand sacrifice from you, but they avoid it personally. And when that happens, leadership, I think, becomes exploitation, not stewardship. Because as leaders, we are supposed to be stewards, So, rules for me, but not for thee. I think you guys have all heard that phrase before. Policies that are enforced strictly at one level and completely ignored at another. Consequences that are applied to the little guy, but avoided by people with a bit more clout. Expectations rising for those who are underneath and oppressed, while those who are above remain insulated from it. That double standard right there, it erodes trust. And without trust, leadership collapses. Jesus, okay, he wasn't against authority. And I want to be clear when I say this, because he was simply just against corrupt leadership. Leadership that used authority to elevate the self instead of serving others. Leadership that cared more about appearances than actual alignment with God. And this is where we have the image problem. Okay, Jesus says this about the Pharisees. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. Okay, that's not just ancient. Okay, it is modern. It is still the same. Image-driven leadership, right? Carefully crafted public perception. Polished messaging, but behind the messaging is complete misalignment because reputation has replaced character. So why does this matter for men? Well, for one thing, if you don't recognize this pattern, you will unknowingly submit to it. You will carry burdens that you were never meant to carry. And you're going to accept certain standards that are not rooted in truth whatsoever. And in doing so, you will exhaust yourself trying to meet expectations set by men who they themselves don't even live by them. And over time, that's going to create resentment, or worse, passivity. And there's this breaking point where every man realizes it. They realize that they're carrying something that just doesn't make sense, not responsibility, but burden. not growth, but weight that just leads to nowhere. And in that moment, he's got a choice. He can either keep carrying it blindly or he can start questioning it. And here's the difference between burden and responsibility, okay? Because God, he gives you responsibility. And responsibility, it produces growth. But man-made systems often create burdens. And burdens without purpose produce exhaustion. So here's what Jesus says. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean effortless. It just means aligned, because there is a difference. And look, you were not created to be crushed either. You were not created to live under endless pressure from these misaligned systems in our world today. You were created to grow, to build, to lead, to steward. But you cannot do that if you're constantly weighed down by expectations that are just disconnected from truth. So please also, don't become what you hate. Here's the warning. It's easy to criticize corrupt leadership. It's harder not to become it, because if you gain authority, will you live what you expect from others? Will you carry the weight with your people, or will you create distance and protect yourself? The same pattern you see in others, it can show up in you. Now, mind you, real leadership, it carries weight first. A real leader, he lives the standard. He carries responsibility. He shares the burden with those around him, and he protects those who are under him. He doesn't demand something of someone that he won't do himself. He doesn't enforce what he won't live. That's what stewardship is. That's alignment. Okay? Jesus, he didn't stay silent about corrupt leadership. Neither should you. In your life, recognize the weight that you're carrying, and if it's aligned, and most importantly, if God ever gives you authority, don't lay burdens on others that you refuse to carry yourself. Okay? Do not blindly carry what breaks you. Do not become the man who builds systems that crushes others, because true leadership doesn't sit above the weight, it carries it first.